What if you could add lights and atmosphere to your tabletop RPG experience simply by placing some Brasiers onto your terrain? No wires, no buttons. That'd be pretty cool, right? In today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at the Whiston Castle boards from Terraintronics and building them into some D&D terrain. So we've got some CR1616 batteries, we've got some Hall effect switches, which is effectively a reed switch except an electronic chip instead of a glass tube with a piece of metal, and we've got some LEDs. So I'm just going to quickly wire up one of these switches and then we're going to figure out something cool to make with it. If you're intrigued so far, then remember the term Whiston Castle boards. That's what I'm using here. My buddy David over at Terraintronics does his best to condense different electronic components on the board, specifically with a view to helping the tabletop community with simple electronics in their terrain. But to test out and see if it works, we're going to need a
giant magnet. Giant magnet.
And as you can see, once you apply a magnet, the LED switches on. But is this going to work through some foam? Let's do a quick test to see if this is going to be effective. There's no problem here. The magnetic field is completely uninterrupted by the XPS foam. Anyone who makes purchases from Terraintronics gains full access to all of the STL files that David has designed to complement his electronic boards. In this case, I'm going to be printing off some sconces and 1-inch bases that will perfectly house the Whiston Castle boards. But you also gain access to all previous STL files, including the sconces that I used in the Zorpazorb collab that I did last year. I'm just including that here because I've been asked so many times where I got those STL files from. With these 1-inch bases for the Whiston Castle boards, I also decided to print them off wrong, just to demonstrate how not to orientate the bases on the build plate. And now all of that's leaking out. Okay, that was actually quite a waste of resin. So definitely, if you're printing off these little sconce bases, turn them the other way up so that they can release the spare resin. Am I making any sense? I might be making a little bit of sense, but one thing is for sure, these are not sconces, they're actually Brasiers. So yeah, maybe let me know in the comments how many times I've made that mistake in this video.
Dungeons, and more dungeons!
So I printed loads of sconces and 1-inch bases for my Whiston Castle boards. Now I've just got to build a piece of terrain to put them on. Gladly, in my last big project, I used loads of 1 centimeter thick XPS foam to layer up and create the Arch of Erebor. And in that process, I was left with tons of offcuts that were already cut in a really nice shape. By the way, if you still haven't seen that project, you can check it out by clicking the link at the top of the screen to watch later. And these are the offcuts from that smog project. And as you can see, with very little effort, I'm already halfway on my way to making some sort of D&D boss level dungeon. Speaking of boss level, in my house, when it comes to building D&D terrain, the boss in the dungeon is my wife, aka Blue Cat, because she is the DM. And when she heard that I was making a boss room, she insisted that I have a 1-inch grid. So I marked out the grid. But I didn't want it to just look like straightforward squares. So to break it up, I used my knife to cut some of the tiles in half or in quarters in as random a pattern as I could muster. I then used a pen and also my X-Acto knife to carve in some cracks and also carve away some of the sharp edges in the foam for the old classic never failing tinfoil ball trick to give a nice weathered rock texture. I'm also just using a pencil here to push down individual tiles to give more of an uneven surface between the different tiles. With that complete, now I just have to repeat that whole tiling and texturing process on all the other pieces of foam. Okay, so I really like it, but it's still looking a bit flat and plain, so I'm thinking about doing some raised sections. It seems that in this terrain build, I am getting to use up a lot of my old offcuts from previous projects. This piece of foam was originally one of the floors of my Zorpazorb build that was badly measured, but weirdly, it fits perfectly into this project. And the nice thing about black XPS foam is that it takes texture extremely well. What I really want to do is cobblestones, and there is a really easy way of doing this quickly.
Plus, I've got a secret weapon.
So just finished texturing my centerpiece, and I was also thinking that I was going to add some other areas. So I've gone ahead and I've done some generic kind of tiles that are going to be added into the terrain. I'm going to make these modular so that you can have them like this if you want to, or you can have longer bits to create corridors. There's going to be lots of strategically placed magnets so that it all snaps together and all the lights go on. Finding the right place for the magnets couldn't be easier because I've got a grid on the underside as well, and the magnets very easily make an indentation that go flush with the edge of the foam. We're then going to use a little dollop of hot glue inside each hole, and from this point onwards we're going to make sure that every magnet is placed in the same polarity so that everything snaps together nicely. So all of the magnets I use have to be this way up. Now in theory, these two tiles should snap together, like so. Perfect. It was a little bit trickier to find out exactly where I wanted my magnets on my centerpiece, so I used a pin to poke through the foam. I then clearly marked out where I wanted the magnets with a pen. This way I was able to ensure that they are going to align perfectly with the magnets that I'm putting inside the terrain board itself. I then did the exact same thing on the terrain board, counting out individual tiles so that I didn't make any mistakes. This way the tiles will snap onto the board in perfect alignment, which is really satisfying. Woohoo! And while that's setting, I'm going to be gluing my sconces to my 1-inch bases ready for painting. It's dark outside, trying to get these primed up. Okay, let's get this terrain painted. As you can see, I've already gone ahead and primed my foam with black paint and Mod Podge. I then started in with a heavy dry brushing of dark grey over the whole terrain. Next up, I used burnt umber to bring in some muddy tones on the terrain. I didn't give the terrain a full coverage here, but more of a random and patchy effect, right before dry brushing some green grey by Liquitex Basics to start bringing in some of those highlights, but also keeping the earthy colours. When painting stonework, I enjoy including a lot of different colours, and I find that I use yellow ochre a lot. This kind of adds that muddy, well-trodden, grimy dungeon look. I then added some white to my burnt umber to start ramping up the highlights on the terrain, followed by an even brighter highlight by adding the white to my green grey. Now that the highlights have been added, it is time to bring those tones back down again by using some dark brown and dark green washes. For this I use mostly watered down Agrax Earth shade and Athonian Camo shade, but also using those washes neat in a few small areas to really bring out the feel of dirt and grime collecting in the cracks and crevices of the terrain. When it comes to the bases of the braziers, I matched the stonework as best as I could, and I then did a very simple paint job on the braziers themselves, using a base coat of rough iron followed by an overbrushing of gunmetal, both from Army Painter. As for adding the electronics into these braziers, it really couldn't be simpler. You simply pass your LED through the holes in the Whiston Castle board, then all you have to do is solder them into place. You can then bend the legs of the LED and fit the Whiston Castle board into your braziers. I didn't film it, but you could also add a little piece of tape or even a small dollop of hot glue anywhere you think there might be a risk of a short happening. As for the rest of the process, you can see on screen what I am doing, or if you want a more detailed look, you can check out my video called Turn LEDs into Realistic Fire for your diorama. I honestly think that there's so much scope for these Whiston Castle boards with tabletop gaming and terrain building. Using the braziers is just one simple application. I'm definitely going to be doing some more experimenting, but I'm also curious what you guys think they could be used for. So please let me know in the comments below if there are any cool ideas that you think I should try out. I'm so pleased with how the terrain turned out in this project. I actually like this terrain so much that I reckon I may build upon the idea further and do some more expansions for it. But the ability to add instant atmosphere to your tabletop by placing Brasiers down anywhere there is a magnet, well, I just think that's really cool. Hats off to Daffod for some nice ingenuity, and I'm sure that you guys can see even more potential from here. One idea that Daffod and I have been brainstorming on is using the Whiston Castle boards as some kind of condition marker for your D&D character when they stand on certain areas of the board. This one still needs fleshing out a little bit, but we will see where that one goes. What do you reckon? Does this idea have any legs? A huge thank you as always to everyone over on Patreon. You guys are utter legends. Let's do some brainstorming over there and see if we can come up with some even cooler applications for these Whiston Castle boards. If you know somebody who is a DM or a terrain builder, please share this video with them if you think that the information is going to be useful for their terrain building journey. I would love to see how the hive mind comes up with different ideas for the applications for these Whiston Castle boards and make them even cooler. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.